Okay, so I'm going to hit this. I'm going to start my screen share. Make sure I'm where
It says you were in a practice session. Are you going to change that?
I'm going to change it, and I'm going to change it right now. And we are live. There we go. All right, so we'll get started in just a moment. We're letting folks in. Welcome, friends. We'll get started in just a moment. Gonna let the room fill up. Until then, I'm going to put a link in the chat box to tonight's document and make sure that everyone can use the chat is open. And I'm going to go ahead and get started with tonight's library announcements. Hello, everyone. I'm Anissa. I'm a librarian at San Francisco Public Library. One of my biggest jobs is working on our One City, One Book campaign. And if you have not heard, I hope you've heard, because I feel like I've been talking about it for almost a year now. But our One City, One Book for 2022 was This Is Ear Hustle. And so the amazing thing with this campaign is I get to work with all sorts of people who are tied to the concept of the book, which Ear Hustle is a podcast coming out of San Quentin, which brings us to tonight's presenter, Peter Merts, who is a photographer, and I will get to him and tell you all about him in just a moment. All of our One City, One Book events, most of them, some of them were in person and weren't recorded, but some of them were in person and recorded, and we had many virtual events. They are available on our YouTube channel, and I'm going to throw that in the chat in case you missed any of those amazing events, because wow, the people that work in the subject of incarceration, reentry, art as transformation, they are amazing. So please check that out. The San Francisco Public Library acknowledges that we occupy the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homelands, and as uninvited guests, we want to pay our respects to their ancestors, elders, and relatives of the Ramaytush community. And I encourage you to check out an amazing women-led group in the East Bay, Segurite Land Trust, and I will put them in the chat in a bit. And follow the work that they're doing. They're doing amazing work. And I'm also going to throw down a great reading list. So I want to tell you about some upcoming events we have tomorrow in person at our main library. The Irish Repertory Theater and Fish Amble will be doing a theatrical reading. Should be amazing. So folks all the way traveling from Ireland, they did a stop in New York City, San Francisco, and LA. So we're one of the fortunate stops. Please come out 5:30, the Correct Auditorium. We are back open and available. We are celebrating in April Climate Action Month, and we will be having our friends of the soulmates of the natural world, the National Park Services, will be presenting about forest health and resilience in Marin. They are always a fun group and informative. We'll be partnering with one of our favorite bookstores on the 24th Street corridor, Medicine for Nightmares, and the Diasporic Vietnamese Artist Network. And we'll be having Jennifer Chang and Diana Coy Nguyen in conversation. And so I love an offsite event. Come check out that bookstore if you haven't seen it. It is gorgeous. Superfoods. April 15th, Main Library Learning Studio, hard to get to, 5th floor, and then it's way in the back corner, but come, this is sure to be a great book. It is a top seller, and I'm sure it's going to be very informative. If you've been in the Bay Area for any amount of time, you know who Annie Sprinkle is. So Annie Sprinkle and her partner Beth Stevens are going to be celebrating Earth Day with a walking tour. We'll meet at Bernal Heights Library out front in the amphitheater area. And we will be walking to Holly Park, and it is so fun. We did it last year. We had about 40 people, and it is a fun ride. So wear your walking shoes, dress for the occasion if you like. So this is an Earth Day Eco-Sex walking tour with Annie and Beth of Earth Lab. Not to miss, I promise you. All right, so tonight we have Peter Merts, and Peter is a photographer residing in the San Francisco area. For decades, he's focused on documenting the work of several arts-based nonprofit organizations. He's the co-author of Paths of Discovery, Art Practice and its Impact in California Prisons, and the author of Ex Crucible, The Passion of Incarcerated Artists. And his books cover 15 years, both women and men's prisons, showing images of incarcerated artists engaging in visual performance and literary art forms, more than 100 photos, including images of prison towns. And we all know that, well, if we don't all know, I'd love you all to know how much art does transform people. And I think we're going to learn some stuff tonight and see some stuff tonight. Without further ado, Peter Merts, take it away.
Thank you, and it's in the San Francisco Public Library for this opportunity to present my work photographing in California state prisons. And thank you for audience for signing in today. All right, I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Okay. So, as Anissa mentioned, for the last 15 years, I've been driving up and down the state of California to some of the remotest, most desolate corners where the state prisons are. I visited all 36 California state prisons, and I've photographed an art class, at least one art class in each of those prisons, and in some prisons I've been back many times. Over the 15 years, one of the products of that project was this book, Ex Crucible, The Passion of Incarcerated Artists, which I was delighted to have published last year by Daylight Books. But tonight, I think what I'll do is talk not about this product of my photography project, but really I'm going to lift the curtain and take you behind the scenes and show you some of my process of engaging with this photographic project over the last 15 years. And I will say that when I photograph art classes, I have the same focus, which is that I tend to focus on process rather than the art product or the art performance. If I can only visit a class, so classes run 10 or 15 weeks, if I can only visit one class, my sweet spot is the second half of the class, somewhere in there. So the guys have already started working together, they're hitting their stride, they've gotten over their initial nervousness or jitters, and there's some art product that can be photographed, 3/4 of the way through the class. So that's my goal. So I'm going to talk to you about process. And the structure I'll use is, I thought I would address 3 of the most common questions I get about this project, which are, how did I get started photographing in prisons? That's a popular question. How did I get access to the prisons with a camera over such a sustained period of time? And the third question I'll address tonight is, do folks in prison want to be photographed? An important question. So let's start with the first question. How did I get started on this project? Well, I'm dating myself, but this was the late 70s when I took a job with a nonprofit in Marin County called Bread and Roses. Some of you may know of Bread and Roses. Bread and Roses takes free, live, quality entertainment into institutional settings where people can't get out to see live entertainment. Bread and Roses takes performers into senior centers, children's hospitals, daycare centers, drug rehab centers, and also jails and prisons. So during my 3 years of working for Bread and Roses and the subsequent decades since, when I've continued to photograph Bread and Roses programs, I would occasionally go to a program at San Quentin State Prison. So here is Audrey Auld, a Bay Area, well, she's originally from Tasmania, but she lived in the Bay Area until, unfortunately, her death some years ago. But here she is going into San Quentin. This is the Sally Port of San Quentin. She's going in with some other musicians to perform a concert at San Quentin. And this is the Mobile Home Boys, who played country western and Americana on the Upper Yard San Quentin. That's where this is. And here's Michael Franti on the Upper Yard at San Quentin, saluting the audience that came out to hear him on this day. And also he seems to be saluting Mount Tamalpais, which is in the background there, which is visible from the Upper Yard at San Quentin. So one of the days I was photographing a concert at San Quentin, I think it was that Franti concert, a man approached me who was working at the prison, and he said, "Peter, I teach art classes here at San Quentin. Would you be interested in coming to have a look? Maybe you could help us document the art classes there." So sounded interesting to me. So I went up and visited the art class, and I almost immediately fell in love with the art program. And I'll explain why as we go further. But at that point, I started visiting San Quentin quite regularly, going back to many of the art programs that were being taught at San Quentin. So here's, this is a picture of the main gate at San Quentin, the main entrance into the prison. This is North Block Housing Unit at San Quentin. The San Quentin Art Studio is just to the left of this picture. And this is a view of North Block from inside the San Quentin Art Studio. Now I have some, this is a painting by an incarcerated artist. His name was Ronnie Goodman, who painted this view of the San Quentin lower yard. Ronnie was incarcerated for many years at spent some of that time in San Quentin, was an exceptional artist, and he was released some years ago. He struggled once he got out, and unfortunately just passed away. But he's done, this is also Ronnie's work of San Quentin. What you're looking at here is there was an old building at San Quentin that was there since the 1800s. It was knocked down because they needed to build a new hospital, but they loved the old facade. So they left the facade up, they knocked the rest of the building down, and then they built a new hospital behind that facade. So this is the setting sun over the shoulder of Mount Tam, streaming through the open windows of the facade that was just standing. And that's a chaplain there admiring the scene. And this is a painting by Ronnie Goodman of the art studio itself at San Quentin. That was how I got started with this project. Bread and Roses kind of led me into it. So the next thing I want to talk about is, how do I get such good access to prison programming, particularly with a camera? Because, as you may imagine, prisons are skeptical of cameras. Well, with regards to my relationship with the Department of Corrections, as you can imagine, working with any large institution, or particularly a security-minded institution, it's important to follow the rules, learn the lingo, communicate thoroughly, exercise patience. There's all sorts of things that happen that are unexpected in prison. And I tried to streamline the process, to make it easy for everyone that I was coming in contact with, because I wanted to be able to return to the prisons. So I wanted, to do what I could to make sure that my visit went well. To that end, here's an example of one way that I tried to streamline the process. A couple of weeks before I visit any particular class to photograph it, I have to mail in my equipment list of all the equipment that I plan to take that day. This is my equipment list. You can see at the bottom, it was signed by someone at the prison. This list was then forwarded to the security gate so that when I showed up for my appointment at the prison with all of my gear, there was an officer there who had this, and he said, okay, let's open your bags and I want to see everything that you have and we'll check it off against this. So what I've done to streamline the process is I know where everything is in my bag and my cart so that when it's really fast for us to go through this. We go through it when I go in and we go through it when I come out. So that's just an example of ways that I can make things easy for the officers with my photography. So another thing I do is I share the photos with the Department of Corrections because it's their program, the Arts and Corrections program that is the main thing that I'm photographing. The Department of Corrections was happy to use my photographs to promote this programming, and I was happy to let them use my photos. And in fact, I maintain an archive of all of my prison art photos for the last 15 years on my website. As you can see, each time I do a new shoot, I create a new folder, which goes here. This is in reverse chronological order, so that new shoots get to the top of this stack. And the archive is searchable on a number of features, like the prison name, the type of art that's being taught, which could be anything from drawing, painting, sculpture, printmaking, so visual arts, also performance arts, music, theater, literary arts such as creative writing, and even audio journalism is being taught now in a few of the prisons. Another thing that helped me a lot, and this is not something I could arrange myself, but I was lucky enough to develop a supporter in the Department of Corrections who appreciated the work that I was doing. And she's been, whenever I go to a new prison and I want to photograph a class there, if the prison doesn't know who I am and wants to know why I want to take a camera into a prison, my friend up in Sacramento at CDCR headquarters helps grease the wheels for me. So that's really appreciated. It really helps a lot. Her name is Chrissy Kukobashvili. She's great. In addition to the Department of Corrections, there are other entities that I need to coordinate with and stay in contact with for all of my shoots. So this little chart is the only one like this we'll have to look at tonight, but let me just walk you through this. Top left, California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, they fund the Arts and Corrections program in all of their state prisons. But CDCR wisely recognized that they don't know how to teach art or run art classes. So they contracted with the California Arts Council. And so money passes from CDCR to CAC. The California Arts Council then works with providers of instructors throughout the state. Now, I just listed 3 here, but there can be as many as 20 at a time. These are the organizations that provide the teachers: William James Association, Marine Shakespeare Company, Fresno Arts Council, Actors Gang down in the LA area. Each of these teaching organizations then contracts with one or more prisons, and there are 36 prisons. I didn't have room to show all of them here. This is just sort of a representative sample. And then there are multiple teachers teaching different subjects in each prison. And of course, the teachers interact directly with the art students. So either before, during, or after a shoot, I will have connected with someone at every level of this chart. It's just how it works. So it's a great team. All right, let's look at some images. This one is from San Quentin. Now, some of the images I'm showing tonight are in the book, the Ex Crucible book that I showed you in the beginning, and some are not. So I'm really showing you more of my overall process here, not just that book, that one book. This is origami class at San Quentin. Portraiture. This is Ronnie Goodman on the left, a painter. This happens to be at San Quentin as well. This many of the art classes are held wherever they can, in chapels, in visiting rooms, are very common. This is a gymnasium, and the gyms are not very well lit. So this man was in the corner of this gym. They all had their easels set up, and the whole class was painting there, and the instructor was there, so they painted for 3 hours. And then the class was over, and so they were all leaving. So this man was curious to see what he had been painting on in the dark, basically, for the last few hours. So as he was leaving the gym, he stopped in this window light to take a look at his painting. By taking pains to coordinate with all of those organizations and smooth things and make things go as smoothly as possible, I do get some benefits. Had access to all 36 California state prisons. There are actually only 34 now. They've been closing a couple in recent years. I get support from all levels of CDCR and from the teaching organizations. I often get my expenses covered by the teaching organization. So if I get invited to go down to I live in San Francisco area. If I get invited to go to Southern California to photograph a class in a prison there, I'll have to spend the night. So the teaching organizations who invite me to do the photography often cover some or most of my expenses. And then during that 15-year period, when I was working on this project, for 15 months of that, I was actually on contract for the California Arts Council, which allowed me to go to all of the prisons, especially the most remote ones. And here I am. Visiting, there are 2 prisons in Blythe, California, which is on the Arizona border, right there on the Colorado River, Ironwood and Chuckawalla Valley. And here I am going into Ironwood this day. The sign says no video or filming or picture taking beyond this point. Almost, I think all the prisons have that sign somewhere that I notice as I'm driving in. Of course, I have special permission, so I'm able to photograph beyond that. Okay, now this is a big question, right? Do folks in prison want to be photographed? So let's think about a few things. Number one, images of incarcerated people. They have their state ID badge, which has their image on it, and that's maybe rephotographed every 5 or 10 years if they're incarcerated, but it's usually a really bad photo. So I don't think incarcerated people get much comfort from their state ID badge. Another possibility of how they can get photographs of themselves is in the visiting rooms when visitors come and the incarcerated people go in to meet their loved ones in the visiting room. If they pay $2, they can have one of the prison staff use an inexpensive camera and take a quick snapshot. I've seen a lot of these snapshots that were made in visiting rooms, and they're really bad. The color's bad, the light is low, they're just awful. The only good thing about it is that the incarcerated person can stand with their loved one who's visiting, and they can be photographed together. So that's really special. But in terms of good photographs of the incarcerated people, they can't get those. Not only that, but they don't really have real mirrors in prisons. You know, they have polished steel plates that shows a reflection that they, you know, in the toilet areas. Well, the other thing is that when I show up in the prison with my camera, and other journalists go into prisons occasionally, but when journalists go into prison and they make photographs, the men or women who are being photographed often never see those photos, right? It appears in a magazine or a newspaper somewhere, or they might not even know what the subject of the article is. So when I show up and I'm being accompanied by a prison staff person because I have a camera, I'm most likely seen as part of the establishment, part of the Department of Corrections, like who is this guy and why is he here? So that doesn't work well for me making photographs, right? I think that the photographs I'm making of these art classes, I think the students will love to see them, but how do I convince them of that? How do I get buy-in from them? So I've developed a process for trying to explain who I am, what I'm doing. Now, here's an example. This is, before I photograph anyone inside a prison, they must have signed a CDCR 146 form, which is what this is. So this gives me permission to photograph the person who signed it. I will say, as you might be able to tell, it's a long form. There are a lot of fields, some of which are to be filled in by a staff person, and some of which are to be filled in by the incarcerated person. So it's really hard to fill this in, and particularly for people who don't speak English very well, it's really difficult. So one of the things I did to try to make the process a little simpler was I just use a highlighter to highlight just the fields that the incarcerated person needs to fill out. Pre-populated some of the fields where I could, and then I make 50 or 60 copies of this and take them to the prison. Because my escort, who is supposed to bring these forms to the shoot, usually forgets. So they don't have to run back out through the security gate to their office in the admin building, then come back in with the forms. I usually just make sure I always have a stack with me. And so then we ask the students to fill these out before I start photographing. Okay, let's see. So another thing I do to try to get myself on the inside of these classes instead of being on the outside is I align myself with the instructors. The instructors are beloved by the students. The instructors are just amazing. They're such they're talented artists. The instructors are, but they also are kind. And they have a way of engaging with incarcerated people that just really works. What I will do is a couple of weeks before I plan to go in and photograph, I'll ask the instructor to inform the students that a photographer will be coming. This allows the student to think in advance about whether they want to be photographed. And if they do want to be photographed, it allows them to come camera ready. So I ask the instructors to inform the students in advance. And then on the day of the shoot, this is an art class, but I ask for 5 minutes at the beginning of each class that I'm going to photograph so that I can address the students. And I take 5 minutes and I tell why I'm shooting. It's to promote prison art programming. I let them know that I'll be moving in really close, but give me a signal if I'm getting too close so that you can't even concentrate on what you're doing. I let them know the flashes. I use 2 flashes on stands. I let them know the flashes are going to flash. So I really try to just paint a picture for them of what I'm going to be doing. And it helps, I think. These days, many classes, no one opts out, or sometimes there's 2 or 3 people who might opt out in a big class. This scene we're looking at now, the instructor is the woman with her hand on her face. It's only 1 week to performance time, and they're having a choreographic problem, and they're trying to solve, and so she's a little bit stressed, I think. These life-size paper dolls in front of the men represent the women in the men's lives, and the men during the piece, which is a movement and spoken word piece, they interact with these paper dolls. So more of these amazing instructors. This is a mariachi band class. This is Afro-Caribbean drumming. This is down in Central Valley, I believe. One of the prisons down there. So, so incarcerated people do have mixed feelings about photographs, but I've been fairly successful in breaking through that initial resistance. This is actually a charcoal drawing of one of the instructors. Patrick was an art instructor at San Quentin. He was a painting instructor. This is a charcoal drawing done by Ronnie Goodman. You can see at the bottom, it was signed by many of Patrick's current and former students. Patrick taught at San Quentin into his 80s, I believe. He taught there for almost 20 years, I believe. And he unfortunately passed away a few years ago, before the pandemic. Another thing the instructors do that makes them so beloved is they are, where they can, and it varies on how easy or difficult it is from prison to prison, but the instructors, when they can, they bring original artwork out of the prison to put it on display in public spaces. This is the San Francisco Opera House. Beethoven's Fidelio was playing there. And of course, that's a play about prison life. So the teacher at San Quentin had the opportunity to show some of the inmates' artwork here. Some of my photos were included as well as context. And this is an art exhibit going up outside of Governor Newsom's office. This is at the State Capitol building in Sacramento. This included original artwork from the Prison Arts Collective down in Southern California, as well as some of my photographs, which are used for context. So another thing that I will do in trying to give the artists anything that I can, so that I'm just not wanting to take pictures. I want to be able to give them something back. I started thinking about families. Now, families are really important to incarcerated men and women, as you can imagine. If you look at all of these, many of these, this artwork was done by a father or an uncle of their child or their nephew, niece, daughter, wife. But in addition to men and women making artwork about their family, good artists in prison are very well respected, and people commission them to do portraits. So in some of these cases, a man might go to an artist with a photograph and say, "Hey, I love your drawing. Could you do a drawing of my daughter?" And an exchange will be made. So some of these may be contracted portraits here. And occasionally when I'm shooting, and I'm shooting the artwork, but occasionally an artist will take the opportunity to speak directly to a loved one through my camera, such as this. So I call these URL strips. What I'll do is, in that 5 minutes where I'm addressing the artist before I start shooting, when I'm asking if they will opt in for photographs, I give each person one of these slips of paper. They're just small slips of paper. This tells how to find the photos I'm shooting that day on my website. So it gives a URL and a click sequence. Now, of course, the incarcerated artists, this is useless to them because they don't have access to the internet, but this is information they can pass to their family members. So the family members do look at the photos that I make of their loved ones. Another thing I've been able to do, because I'm not able to give directly to the people that I photograph inside, There's an over-familiar policy that prevent over-familiarization between visitors and incarcerated people. So I'm not allowed to give anything. So what I've done is found a way to post these on my archive, on my website, and I've got a widget on my website that connects to a third-party photo printing service. So people can order prints from my photo archive at their cost, at the cost of printing. So I don't, the money doesn't come to me. I don't need any money off of this. I do it as a service to the families. But they're able to order prints and pay for them to this third-party service, and it works pretty well. So a lot of the inmates, so the families will order prints and send them into the inmates. Occasionally, also sometimes the teaching artists will make prints and give them, are able to get them into the students. In some prisons where the rules are a little bit less severe. Another thing I do when I have time, at the end of a documenting an art class, if there's finished work or even in process work, I'll photograph that for the artists. So I've got some examples of some artwork that I copied here. In this case, I just happened to pick the subject of birds to show you some examples of artwork that was made in the prisons. You can imagine why birds are a popular subject for artists in prison. I love the variety of styles too, looking through actually any art class. If it's a very beginner art class, they may all be doing exercises, but some of the classes, they're advanced students, and the teachers usually let the advanced students just work on whatever they want to work on, sort of independent study. I've noticed that a lot of incarcerated artists will focus on their culture and heritage, and really drill down into that sometimes, which you can see here. And yet another thing I'll do, if there's time, is so I'll check with the instructor and I'll say, hey, do you think there'll be time to do a few portraits at the end of the class? And if it's okay with the instructor, and I'll offer that to the students, and it's usually very enthusiastically received. They love having portraits taken, and of course the families love the portraits too. So whenever I can, I'll take portraits. That's San Quentin in the background there. This is what Tony Steiner, one of the more well-known folks incarcerated at San Quentin. He's had quite a history. He's out now. Many of the people in the photographs here, some of these photos are older that I'm showing you tonight, and many of the men are out now, including Watani. This man was in a storytelling class, and you can see that scar that goes across top of his head. He told an amazing story about his attempted suicide with a gunshot to his own head, and how he survived that. That they had to do some work on his brain, which is why you see the scar there. California Institution for Women down in the Los Angeles area. The face paint is because it's a theater class based on the theatrical form of Commedia dell'arte, this ancient Italian form, which uses masks to play stock characters. This man is a writer. He's out now. More communication with family members, you can see here. Another point is that for some art forms are less dynamic than others, visually dynamic. For example, a writing class. As you can imagine, it doesn't make sense to photograph people sitting and writing, but they often read to each other. So that's when I make the photographs, is during the readings. This man was in a storytelling class, and he was interested in a portrait at the end of the class. And I'll interact with these artists when I'm making the portraits, and together we'll kick around ideas of, you know, of how to pose and whether we want to use props or not. So that's the three basic questions I wanted to explore here in terms of explaining my process. This is a bonus question. I'll throw in one more question. What is the meaning of Ex Crucible? Where did it come? So crucible, you know, the original meaning crucible is this inert stone container that you apply a lot of heat to, and it's used for refining precious metals such as gold and silver. So in my formulation, I believe that the prism is the immutable stone container. The high energy that's applied is just the fact of incarceration and the trauma that got men and women into the incarceration, the trauma that they're experiencing while they're incarcerated. This is the energy that and to me, the precious substance that's refined in my formulation is artistic passion. So that's why I came up with the title, From the Crucible. What delights come from the crucible. And that, I believe, is all I had to say about my photography project. Thank you all for attending. And let me see, I'm going to stop share now, and hopefully Anissa is there.
I am here, Peter. We did have a question in the audience, which was, how much time do you get per shoot?
How much time is each shoot?
Yeah, like how much time do you get to spend doing one shoot? Is it one day only, or? Well,
yeah, so this is kind of tricky because I have a camera. I have to be escorted by a staff member of the prison. So when I ask to go in and photograph a class, I'm basically asking a lieutenant at the prison to spend half a day with me, in which case he can't do any other work because he's got to be chaperoning, escorting me. So my preference is to attend the entire class, however long the class is. Most classes, they run 2 to 3 hours, something like that. Occasionally you'll have classes that run longer even, but I'll try to shoot for typically an entire 3-hour class. And I don't want to stop because you never know, you know, as soon as I pack my lights up and my camera, if the class is still going, something will happen that I really wish that I had captured. So I shoot for the entire few hours of each class.
That's great. It seems like you, I mean, your relationship, from what I can see with the photos, it seems like you're spent like a week with them. So that's amazing, Peter, that it's only a couple hours.
Thank you.
Jennifer asks, how do you choose the classes if you're able to?
That's a good question. Yeah. So basically, I'm invited by the teaching organizations to photograph a class. So I'll go and photograph any class that where I'm invited, basically. Although I will say that I have become particularly fond of theater and dance classes lately, just because they're so visual. But I also love the challenge of photographing a writing class, or or a storytelling class where there's less props and movement. So I'll photograph anything. And let's see, we got any more questions out there?
Let's see, I do. There was lots of comments while you were talking, and lots of good stuff, of course, like wonderful. Everyone loved the fact that you set it up so you could share with family members. I think that's amazing to people. Mm-hmm. Have you ever shot some of the same folks? Have you ever shot some of the same folks in different prisons and then you find them in another prison? That would be interesting.
Yeah, I'll tell you what's happened 3 times just recently. I was up at Pelican Bay about a month ago, photographing a class up there. And a man came walking towards me, with a sheet of paper in his hand. And he looked vaguely familiar. And if he hadn't spoken to me and explained who he was, maybe I could have eventually figured out who he was. But he came up and he said, "Peter, you photographed me." So this was at Pelican Bay, which is on the Oregon border. It's the northernmost California prison. He said, "Peter, you photographed me at RJ Donovan, which is outside of San Diego, almost Mexico, 3 or 4 years ago. And guess what? I have that photo here." He had with him that day a photograph that I had made of him years before on the other end of the state. What had happened was his family had gotten the photos off my website, mailed it into him. He just printed it out on note paper and sent it to him. And when he heard that a photographer was coming to his art class at Pelican Bay, he thought, maybe it's that same guy who photographed me in RJ Donovan. So he brought that. That's why he brought the piece of paper with him. So I've seen a number of, and there was another man in the same art class actually that I had photographed, and he had a different prison. And he introduced himself to me again. And I love that. Right? When they come up and say, in fact, I was just the other day at a prison in Chuckawalla, and all the guys were coming in. There were about 30 guys in the class. And I hear this, "Peter Merts," yelled out. And so, yeah, I've been doing this long enough now that it's getting easier to get access, for one thing. And it's getting in because the artists have heard about my photography now. They trust me now and let me make they opt in for the photographs. But yeah, it's fun to get my name called out on a prison yard when I'm walking by.
Yeah, I think that's
done in a nice way.
That's really amazing. I mean, it takes a special kind of person to be able to walk all of those lines. So the judicial side of it, and then the art side of it, and then the incarcerated side of it. So you must have a very even-keeled temperament, Peter. How can the public know if there's an art exhibit from a prison somewhere currently on display?
Yeah. I don't think there's really a central clearinghouse for it. So it would be each of the teaching organizations. So I would say, if you want to see prison art, if you could find out who are the teaching organizations in your area, and get on their mailing list, and you'll probably find, like here in the San Francisco area, there's the Marin Shakespeare Company, there's the William James Association down out of Santa Cruz, KELW teaches audio journalism. That's a radio station that's teaching audio journalism in prisons. Or there's probably some I'm forgetting. There's a lot of them down in Southern California. If one were to go to the California Arts Council website and look for arts and corrections, you can see all of the arts providers listed there. And so that's what I would recommend. And if someone wants to reach out to me, they're welcome to do that, and I can help them find what teaching organizations are near them.
That's great. Thank you, Peter. And same with me. You can reach out to me. I can help. Let me help you. I'm a librarian. And let's see. Have you noticed any changes overall or specific prisons over the course of your work in them? Have you noticed changes overall at specific prisons over the course of your work in them?
You know, what comes to mind initially when thinking about that is the announcement that just came out this week about San Quentin State Prison, which is going to be turned into a rehabilitation center. Governor Newsom announced that, and that is sounds very exciting. Of course, we don't know yet how it's going to be implemented. But the fact that there is a recent move to increase rehabilitative services is great to hear. Other than that, you know, people ask me about the differences between different prisons, but my view of each prison is very narrow when I go in. You know, I'm escorted by a staff person from the front gate all the way into the classroom where the art's happening. So I'll see folks in the yards as I walk by, but I don't really have interaction. So the only folks inside I'm interacting with are the artists, the art students, and they are all infraction free for a year. So it's, you know, it's the best behaved people in the prison who get to take the art classes. So it's hard for me to make generalizations about differences between prisons. I do get reports about which ones have more incidents of violence and things like that. But that I'm usually the art classes are usually insulated from any kind of trouble or violence. And in fact, the art students police their own classes because they know if anything happens, like if a cutting tool were to disappear from one of the classes, the class could get shut down for sometimes months at a time. And the men don't want that because they love their classes. So they work together to help each other make sure that nothing goes awry. Oops, I can't hear you, Anissa. I think you're muted.
I was muted, yes. That is interesting news about San Quentin, and there is an Ear Hustle episode about Norwegian prison model that you can check out. Very interesting. And you know what, that would be just, that could transform so many lives. Has this changed yours or any of the people you know's perspective on the prison system after photographing so many folks?
Well, it's changed my opinion, and yeah, I've had friends who have told me that looking at my books about this project has changed the way that they think about incarcerated people, and it changed me too. I was really surprised at the spirit that goes on in these art classes. There's a lot of mentorship. There's joking. I mean, there's occasionally a little bit of jealousy, I'm sure, but the spirit of the feeling of the room is very free. The men and women set aside the normal rules of the yard when they come into an art class. So, for example, races don't mix on the yards at all, and because, well, there's just a rule, an unwritten rule about that. But in the art room, the races mentor each other, they collaborate, they work together. It's just really different. I've heard a number of artists have told me that the art class is their sanctuary inside prison.
I can imagine. Let's see. I just recently saw a film that Nigel and Erwan kind of moderated called Art and Crimes, and all about an artist who gets pretty famous from his work, but then it also features, I think, 3 other artists, and it does tell their story, and it's very interesting. They talk a lot about how much the artist is revered inside, and then the revelation of coming out and seeing that it's not quite exactly the same as, you know, it's not, you're more respected as an artist inside at times. And is that a Ronnie Goodman painting in the background?
Yes.
Ah, gorgeous.
That would, yeah, I showed a picture of that during my,
yeah. Ronnie Goodman is well loved at the library. He's done even some illustrations of the library. He often came by. So he was a well-loved person at our library. What's your most memorable photographic shoot?
Oh man. My most memorable photographic shoot. Well, I'm afraid I'm sort of drawing a blank. You know what? It's often the most recent shoot I did. Um, I come at, the shoots, like I say, are like 3 hours long often. Plus, I've got all my gear, my lights and my cameras in a wagon, and so I'm pulling this wagon all over the prison. So it's exhausting. But invariably, at the end of a 3 hour shoot, which more like a 5 hour effort on my part, I feel energized and excited just by being in this room with all this creativity and just the spirit that the men and women have. So yeah, I always come out just really excited and enthused about the project. And so even though I've just published a book and I'm doing these book talks, I'm still shooting. I still want to shoot. I still have ideas about different portraits I want to make and things like that. So I'm continuing.
That's great. Yeah, there is a question about, are there scenes that you are still hoping to capture that you haven't yet? And I think you answered that.
Yeah. I will say also that when I first started doing this project, I thought about doing it objectively, sort of as an objective documentary photographer, fly on the wall, uninvolved, sort of standing back and photographing. But what I found was that didn't capture the spirit of what was going on in these rooms. So I started moving closer. So, and now if there's a dance class, I'm right in the middle of everybody, or a theater product, or a theater rehearsal. I'm right in the middle of things. And it's just an exciting place to be.
Okay, we have time for two more. So you must, this is, okay, three more, including my own. You must know Redessa Jones' work too, then, right? She does a lot of work in the women's prisons.
Yes.
Oh, she's amazing.
Yes.
She's just amazing. Are the prison artists allowed to keep or hang up their artwork after they make it?
They are allowed to keep it. Sometimes they take it back to their cells. But they're not, I have not seen incarcerated artists organize their own art exhibits inside. So I don't think they're allowed to display it inside, unfortunately. And I've heard people suggest, why not, if an artist's on one yard, could just put up a temporary exhibit in the mess hall or something like that. The teaching artists have more experience with that than I do. There may be issues as to why that hasn't been done yet that I'm not aware of. But inside exhibits, no. But it's the outside exhibits. Even though the incarcerated artists don't get to see these exhibits, which are in the public outside, they know that they're there and they love that they're there. And their teachers go to these exhibits and photograph the exhibits with the people watching and the opening and everything, and take those photos back inside. And in fact, at San Quentin, at one point, a guest printmaker came and worked with the guys to do a huge collaborative print. It was 3 foot by 3 foot, carved on linoleum block. So they carved this really elaborate linoleum block. And there were a group of like 6 or 8 men who worked on this together. But they didn't print it inside. They took it to a book fair in San Francisco where there was a steamroller, an actual steamroller, and they used the steamroller as the press. So they printed this thing, and so I went to San Francisco to the book fair and photographed the inking of the linoleum blocks and the steamroller, and we were able to take those photos back in to the guys inside so they could see how their work that they had produced was printed on the outside.
Cool. And then one last question is, have there been any images that the CDCD does not like? So
at the end of every shoot, I go home, delete my rejects, get my selects, and I send those to the prison to be approved. Now, not every prison requires me to do that because I'm accompanied on each shoot, so they can see what I'm photographing. But for my own safety and just to make sure everything's above, no problems are created, I insist that the prison staff review all of my photos before I post them. Occasionally, they will ask me to withdraw a photo, and usually it's because of some sort of infraction, such as improper dress. If there's over-familiarization going on, like there's a volunteer who's hugging, he's got his arm around an incarcerated person or something like that. It's usually those sorts of infractions. And I've been really lucky so far, and no one has asked me to pull an image that was really unique and really special to me that I really loved. It's usually been ones that's been sort of replaceable anyway. So occasionally, yeah, I do get some images pulled.
Well, I think that also answers why you are invited back so often. You do your due diligence and are able to hit on all three of those areas and really, really fit in. Peter Merts, thank you so much for being here. And audience, thank you for sharing. You had some great words and great questions. And like Peter said, you could email him. You can email me. I have a lot of resources. San Francisco Public Library is one of the only libraries that does reference by mail for our prisons. And we do it for almost all of the prison systems this side of the Mississippi. So our little Department of Jail and Reentry Services is a small and mighty team. So you can reach out to me, you can reach out to Peter, and I'm going to give you one more time here in the chat the link to tonight's doc. And I put a lot of links in this as Peter was giving his his presentation. And again, I'm going to come on view so I can say goodbye to everybody. All right. Thank you, Peter, so much. I really appreciate you being here tonight and sharing your work. And library community, have a good night. We'll see you again.
Thanks.